Hello and welcome to the Essex Boys Murder Case Part 40. Before watching this video, I recommend watching Part 4 onwards on YouTube first, as these videos are all about the key individuals and the murder victims movements on the day of the 6th of December 1995. A quick mention to the Facebook page called The Real Essex Boys Murder Club. If you're interested, please feel free to join, as there's some great people on there with a lot of knowledge on this subject. So this is the 7th and final video of the reconnaissance missions done by Mick Steele, Jack Woombs, Darren Nichols and anyone else a few weeks before and on the day before the triple murders. I'm using phone log evidence, witness statements and Darren Nichols' version of events according to his second statement, as he says he had no prior knowledge the murders were going to take place. In part 1, I discussed how they chose a murder location, a meeting place where they could start their journey that evening, and a plan to lure Tucker, Tate and Rolfe to their deaths. In part 2, I discussed Mick Steele had to be a passenger in the Range Rover to lure them to their chosen location, so he could not have been a shooter. I discussed how Darren Nichols had the chance to buy a firearm, but changed his mind and devised a plan at the last moment to be the getaway driver, which left Jack Woombs, who had access to 2 unlicensed shotguns. I also covered the possibility of them hiring a hitman from the Boers, who are a notorious Canning Town crime family. In part 3, I discussed how they did a recce a few weeks before the murders, going down the A12, then driving on to Brentwood using the country roads and finding a place where they could stop off and put on the fake plates over the original ones. They found a place where Mick Steele could meet the Essex boys and the others would park up close by and wait for them to turn up, and they could set off to the pre-chosen murder location. They found a place which had to be further away from the Rettendon Turnpike, where Mick Steele could get the Essex boys to follow him, so this would give time for the others to get into place down the farm track. At this location, being the Hungry Hippo pub car park, Mick Steele could leave his vehicle there and get into the Range Rover and make sure he sat behind the driver, Craig Rolfe, so when they come to a halt at the closed gate down the track, he could get into open space, head to the gate so the ambush could take place. The recce would have been timed so it was possible to carry out the plan to execute Tucker, Tate and Rolfe. In part 4, I discussed how they did a final recce the day before the murders, and I got up to when they arrived at the farm track in Rettendon. In part 5, I discussed a witness statement from an Alan Grayston, who saw a suspicious male in a field next to the track, walking back to his car, which was parked at the entrance of the track, and the witness also stated that they saw a pair of binoculars on him. Now this was on the 4th of December and 2 days before the murders, and I discussed if it could have been a hitman hired by Mick Steele and the others doing his final checks. I also discussed in that video the call that put Jack Woombs in the village of Rettendon the day before the murders. In part 6, I discussed that call again that Jack Woombs received at 4:39 PM from his landline, and if it was received in the Rettendon area, which I think it was, and did he have time to get to that public phone box on the A127 with the others, so Mick Steele could make that call to Pat Tate's mobile at 5:03 p.m, to which I proved it was possible in the time frame. Then I discussed the calls between Pat Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe after 5:03 p.m, which were frantic, as if Pat Tate had been contacted with information and was trying to contact Tucker and Rolfe to arrange the times to meet up maybe. So on with the final instalment of these recce videos. So I'm going to start where I finished in the last video, which was on the A127 here, near the Halfway House pub, where someone used a public payphone box at 5:03 p.m. to call Pat Tate's mobile. Now this call was not used in the phone log evidence at the trial. I don't know why, because I think it's a very important call in this case. It's hard to work out which day this call was actually made. It could have been the 6th, the day of the murders. It could also have been made on the 5th, the day before the murders. Now, for the purposes of these recce videos, I'm going on the 5th, as it fits in with the frantic phone calls between Pat Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe after the 5:03 p.m. call. I mean, personally, I think this call was made on the 5th, and a final recce was done the day before the murders. Like I said in a previous video, I think the real reason this call was not used as phone log evidence at the trial is because it implicated Darren Nichols. As I said in that video, Darren Nichols can't talk about this call if it was made on the 5th, the day before the murders, at a payphone box close to the Halfway House pub on the A127, because he will be implicating himself in the murders and did have prior knowledge that the murders were going to take place, as he's done a recce with the others and the police could not use him as a supergrass, and he will be charged under the joint enterprise law. And the police and the CPS could not risk this, so it was left out of the trial. Under cross-examination, he could have slipped up about this call that was made on the 5th to Pat Tate's mobile, putting him with Mick Steele and Jack Williams in Brentwood. Then the frantic calls that were made by Pat Tate to Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe some moments after receiving the 5:03 p.m. call. I don't think the police or CPS would risk a self-confessed liar with these type of questions on the stand. So, as I look at the phone log evidence just after the 5:03 p.m. Call, you can see Pat Tate contacting Tony Tucker and vice versa, and then they both contact Craig Rolfe. Now, before I start with these phone logs of Dan Nichols and the others, if they did do a final recce the day before the murders, I think it's plausible they all met up at Mark's Tea just like they were going to do the day after. They've done the same scenario that Darren Nichols said what happened, where he doesn't use his car and leaves it at Mark's Tea, and he gets into Mick Steele's Hilux, and Jack Williams uses a vehicle to follow them down to the locations on the 5th. Now, after that 5:03 p.m. call to Pat Tate from a payphone box on the A127, close to the Halfway House pub, and this is the final part of their plan, Mick Steele finishes the call and says his goodbyes to Jack and Darren Nichols, and he heads off back home to Clacton-on-Sea. Jack gives a lift to Darren Nichols back up to Mark's Tee, where he can pick up his car. Now, as I look down past 5 p.m, I can see Mick Steele and the others' phone logs, and the first one I come across is 5:45 p.m, which is Darren Nichols' landline to his mobile. So from this information, we know he's still out and about. Is he still on his way back up to Mark's Tee with Jack Wooms so he can pick up his car? The next one is at 6:07 p.m. with Jack Wooms phoning Mick Steele's landline. So Jack Wooms is still out and about, but Mick Steele is at home at this time. Now, a little bit further down, we can see Darren Nichols' landline at 7:16 p.m. to his mobile. So he's still not at home. At 7:21 p.m, Jack Wooms uses his mobile to ring his home landline. So what I'm going to do now is dissect all these phone calls and fit them in where they probably are at these times. So if Mick Steele used a phone box on the A127 close to the Halfway House pub to ring up Pat Tate's mobile, then after the call he asks Jack Wooms to take Darren Nichols back up to Mark's Tee so they can pick his car up. So this is the journey back for Jack Wooms and Darren Nichols. Now the red marker here at the bottom is the A127 and the Halfway House pub, and the route they're taking back is the A12 along here up to the grey marker, which is Ron Parkinson's motorcycle shop at roughly 5:45 p.m. Now, Darren Nichols may have driven back up to Mark's Tee to give Jack a rest from driving back up to Mark's Tee, as he's been a passenger all afternoon. Darren Nichols may not have had his phone switched on along this journey back, and could explain that when he gets back to Mark's Tee, he switches his phone on and he receives a call from his landline at 5:45 p.m. The next call is from Jack Wooms' mobile, and he calls Mick Steele's landline at 6:07 p.m. So it is plausible Mick Steele did leave the others at that payphone box on the A127 after making that call to Pat Tate's mobile, and decided to set off straight home to Clacton-on-Sea, and it could explain Jack Wooms ringing Mick Steele's home landline at 6:07 p.m. So if Mick Steele had used that payphone box to ring Pat Tate's mobile at 5:03 p.m. and asked Jack Wooms to give Darren Nichols a lift back with him back to Mark's Tee, then he set off back to the Colchester area, there's enough time for him to get back home and receive that call from Jack Wooms at 6:07 p.m. on his home landline. Now, as you can see from the map, the red marker over here to the left is the A127 and the Halfway House pub, and he would have travelled up the same road as the others, but he had no reason to go to Mark's Tea. So he heads towards the Colchester area, going along the A12 and then on to the A120, then to Meadow Cottage in Clacton-on-Sea. If you remember, he was trying to move house into Meadow Cottage and he was trying to sell Oaklands in Angers Green, which was also in Colchester, but not as far as to get to compared to Meadow Cottage. Now, that journey takes about 1 hour to make, so by 6:07 p.m, Mick Steele is back at his home address. Now, I will go back to the rest of the phone logs between the three that evening. So, if Darren Nichols and Jack Wilms did arrive back at Ron Parkinson's motorcycle shop at 5:45 p.m, what did they do next? Darren Nichols has definitely not gone straight home, because he gets a call from his landline at 7:16 p.m, then at 7:20 p.m, he uses his mobile to phone Mick Steele's landline, which is just down here at the bottom. At 7:21 p.m, Jack Wilms still isn't at home because he uses his mobile to phone his landline. Did they get to their destination, being Mark's Tea, and Darren Nichols got into his car, then went to his local pub in Braintree, and Jack Wilms made his journey back home? Why did they both ring Mick Steele's landline in the evening, and what was said? Were they giving their assurances that their plan to execute the Essex boys was on for tomorrow and there's no backing out? Tucker, Tate and Rolfe need taking out of the game in order for them to carry on their lucrative drug shipments across the channel, especially now Mick Steele has moved properties and is right next to the sea. After the calls, did Mick Steele use the telephone box at the end of his street to phone the hitman to tell him that they have done their final recce that day and they want the hit carrying out tomorrow? Just before I finish up, I'm just going to mention a few things I thought whilst doing the research for these recce videos. Now, these murders were very well planned, and the recce started a few weeks before the murders. Every place was hand-picked for its purpose. A final recce was done the day before the murders, which was crucial. I think there's part fact, part fiction in Darren Nichols' version of events that night. Certain parts of his second statement are plausible and add up via the phone log evidence. It made sense for them to meet up somewhere, which was roughly the same distance to travel to, and start their journey from there, being Mark's Tea. Places have been hand-picked, like the Thorndon Country Park, where Darren Nichols says Jack Williams put false plates over the original ones, and this is where fact and fiction come into play, as I don't believe Darren Nichols when he says that Mick Steele and Jack Williams told him they were just going to do a meet with Tucker, Tate and Rolfe to discuss a drugs deal and nothing more, and he never questioned why Jack Williams was trying to stick false plates over the original ones if it was in fact just a meet over drugs. It was probably his idea to use the false plates. The next important place, the Halfway House pub, which had a large car park so the others could park up close by and wait for the Range Rover to turn up, then they could set off to the murder location and get into place. The car park also had a slip road that led straight on to the A127. The idea of getting the Essex boys to follow Mick Steele past the turning point for Rettendon and then stopping off at another place, leaving his vehicle there, being the Hungry Hippo pub car park, and then making sure he sat behind the driver, Craig Rolfe, so he could get out into open space when the Range Rover came to a halt down the track, as he knew the gate would be locked or shut. And he knew there would be no room to get out on the other side of the back passenger side due to the track being narrow and trees would be in the way. He could then head to the gate so the ambush could take place. I mean, taking the Essex boys to the Hungry Hippo gives the others plenty of time to get to the farm track, walk down and lie in wait for the Range Rover to turn up. Very clever idea and well thought through. I mean, the murder location itself was perfect. All three of them could have known about this place. It's in the countryside off a main road. It's a narrow farm track with a gate at the end which could be shut, so this would bring the Range Rover to a halt so an ambush could take place and the executions would be swift. Did Darren Nichols play a bigger part in the triple murders? From the research I've done in these recce videos, he had the chance to buy a firearm, but when it came down to it, his bottle went and devised a plan to tell the others at the last moment he could not get hold of a firearm. He knew he still had to play his part, knowing what was going to happen, and the others would know he would be a weak link and they could get rid of him as well. So he told them he would play his part and be the getaway driver. To me, he's definitely omitted part of his version of events with the help of the police in order to get convictions for the triple murders. With Darren Nichols now turning supergrass against his friends and willing to give evidence at the trial, then him and his family enter the witness protection scheme afterwards, he's got a good deal and will do little time in prison for his part in the triple murders. I mean, Mick Steele and Jack Williams can't say anything because they have no choice but to deny any involvement in the murders. They can't even say Darren Nichols played a bigger role in the planning of the murders, as they would be admitting their guilt in the crime. They have to go no comment in police interviews. I mean, having made these recce videos, I get the impression at least one more person was involved and played a major part in these murders, maybe two. They also had a link to a notorious Canning Town crime family, and that family knew the executions would be taking place, and they played their part, acting as a conduit between both parties so the Essex boys could be taken out. So, that's it for part 7 and the final video on the reccies that Mick Steele, Jack Williams, Darren Nichols and anyone else may have done prior to the triple murders. The amount of research that went into them was unbelievable. Originally, it was meant to be a 3-parter, but there was so much information to cram in, it ended up turning into a 7-parter. So, if you've watched all 7 videos and were undecided if any reconnaissance missions were done prior to the triple murders, then hopefully you've made up your minds now after watching the videos. So that's it for these recce videos. I hope you've enjoyed them. YouTube subscribers, I'd just like to tell you I have a set of videos that I will be making in the near future based on if a pact was made between Mick Steele and Jack Williams prior to the triple murders. Don't forget you can join the Facebook group called The Real Essex Boys Murder Club. We have over, I think it's 31,000 members last time I checked, and it keeps growing on a daily basis. There's new posts and pictures being approved on a daily basis. All we ask is respect other people's opinions on there, as we all have our own theories on what we think happened that night. Last of all, I'd like to thank the admins who do a fantastic job of keeping the group ticking over. So until next time, take care.